of my life was just routinely taking drugs in order to cope with stress, feelings, self-worth.
Did your drugs of choice evolve as you changed seasons of your life?
I meet with so many people who are in a relationship with someone who's in addiction and they don't know what to do. So the thing I have to tell people, mothers, wives, husbands, brothers, sisters, when they have someone in their family in addiction, is you have to just shut the door. You have to shut the door, lock it, block the phone, and when they're ready to want real help, they will ask for it. For anyone listening who may be struggling with addiction or who has someone in their life who might be struggling with addiction, is, in my experience...
I wonder, how do you then live with a recovered addictive personality? Today, we are going to have a very raw, very real conversation about the topic of addictions, and specifically how to A, acknowledge that we may be caught in a cycle of addictions, and B, how to overcome this cycle of addictions. It is a conversation that's really needed to be heard and to be had, because I can see in my line of work on a daily basis that the topic of addiction is a topic that is still so taboo. Although so many of us struggle in the dark, behind the scenes, with all kinds of addiction, be it to social media, to drugs, to alcohol, using alcohol or drugs or stimulants or medication to soothe, to escape, or to numb. We don't talk about it. In fact, some of my clients even struggle to talk to me about it. And sometimes it can take a few sessions to actually lift the veil and really face the darkness of the cycle of addiction. So today I wanted to bring that conversation on the table, and to do so I've invited a wonderful expert on the topic of addiction. And the reason I've chose Quinn as the expert today is because he has first-hand experience on how to overcome addictions, and not just from an intellectual or medical or clinical standpoint, but Quinn has overcome some of the darkest addiction and has the courage to reveal, one, how he got there in the first place, but also B, how he overcame it. So today I would like you to help me welcome Quinn Stanfield Bruce to the show, who is the visionary behind humanness, and he now helps leaders rebuild cultures with empathy and creativity and purpose. Quinn is doing so after having spent over 20 years with global giants like Unilever, P&G's, and Samsung. So he's really shifted gears on professional and personal fronts. And today he will reveal his personal and professional strategies to stay well, addiction-free, and successful. Thank you, and I hope you will enjoy this episode as much as I enjoy recording it in the heart of London, Shoreditch. This episode is brought to you by our very first show sponsor, capturebee.io. One of the hardest parts of building a business and expanding your personal brand is keeping a steady flow of warm leads and connections. When I first started, chasing leads on LinkedIn was draining, distracting, and let's be honest, not really why I went into business in the first place. Now, just imagine never having to hunt for clients again. No cold outreach, no endless LinkedIn scrolling at 1 a.m., no awkward reels either. That's exactly what CaptureBee does for you. It's a done-for-you outreach service that books warm leads straight into your calendar. And more than that, it can help you get featured on leading podcasts so that you can elevate your personal brand at the same time. Quinn, I'm so glad to have you on today. By the time this episode is aired, it will be nearly 110 episodes in, and yet there is one thing we have never talked about on the show, and it's quite a major thing. It's drugs.
Drugs or addiction?
Both. We've talked about addiction, but more in the context of work addiction. We haven't really touched upon substance addiction. And when I heard your story for the first time, I was really struck by how candid and honest and vulnerable, if I dare say, you were. And I thought this is the kind of raw conversation that actually made me want to create this show in the first place. So the floor is yours, Quinn.
What would you like to know?
how it started. How did it escalate? And when did you wake up one day, or when did you realize that it went from fun and recreational to dark and an addiction, and that something had to change?
The honest truth is, it was probably never fun. And it probably was never recreational. I got suspended for smoking weed at school when I was 13 years old. I remember smoking weed with some friends before going to watch the American Pie movie when that came out, I think in like 2001. And we were 13, I think. And you would have thought that that was fun. Being kids, seeing a funny movie, being a bit high. But the reality is about using mind and mood altering substances like drugs is that I have come to learn that it's simply just wanting to change how I feel. That whatever I'm feeling in the moment isn't enough. That my ability to have fun isn't, without drugs, is not fun. It's not enough. So therefore, if I ever feel compelled to want to use drugs, it's because I don't like how I'm feeling, good or bad. And so under that understanding, any time I made a decision to use drugs, or alcohol for that matter, I personally was trying to change how I felt. So what recovery has taught me is to sit with my feelings, to be present, to be able to enjoy life. So, you asked the question, when did it stop being fun? I genuinely, with hindsight, can tell you, well, maybe it wasn't fun. When I was 13, I was really sad. My parents had got divorced and my mum had left, and I started boarding school. I felt very alone. I felt unlovable. I felt not good enough. And so I wasn't 13 years old drinking and taking drugs because I was happy. Even then, so very early on I learnt that in order to feel better, I need to change how I feel, and I have to use something outside of me to do that. And by far the greatest way to change how you feel is drugs. It's the quickest, most efficient way to do that. When it ended, which was 6.5, 7 years ago, I couldn't go on. I would rather have been dead than carried on. And so, what changed is I'd acknowledged that my absolute best attempt at living life had failed. And I still had everything. I still had house, car, marriage, kids, all of the job, money. That wasn't, I wasn't without those things. I had those things. But the idea that the rest of my life was just routinely taking drugs in order to cope with stress, feelings, self-worth, pressure, existential angst, that I had to take drugs in order to tolerate all of these things, I was like, well, I'd rather be dead. At which point I said, I am willing to change everything in my life. So, and
I'm curious, did your drugs of choice evolve as you changed seasons of your life, or perhaps had more access to more money? I'm just really curious because, at least in my experience working with addiction, I've noticed that there is often either escalation or drastic change of pace, rhythm, and substance choice. So I wonder, did you have this experience? You talked about weed, but I have a feeling that that's not the one that you sort of ended on.
No. It's interesting because drug addicts can genuinely spot, their people. Mm-hmm. When I was in rehab, a guy came up to me. The first thing he said to me, he just looked at me and he went, cocaine. And, we became friends soon after that. And it was, we all have, how do I best answer this? Of course, 13, you sort of start with booze and then you move on to weed, and then eventually I found cocaine when I was about 18. The thing is, cocaine for me was amazing because I can't really drink. I didn't have if I had 3 or 4 beers, I'd end up wanting to go to bed. When I smoked weed, I didn't really like it very much. I ended up just wanting to get some fried chicken and go to bed, right? Like I couldn't actually cause that much damage with alcohol and weed because I couldn't do much. But when I found cocaine and I could just stay awake, I could stay up, I could drink as much as anybody else, it was this amazing thing. For me, it was my drug. So yeah, I mean, I would have identified as a cocaine addict, but again, in recovery, we acknowledge all drugs as things that we don't do.
Did you ever experience co-addiction? For instance, especially with cocaine being such a stimulant, sometimes you take so much of it. My ex-husband was addicted to cocaine, so I've sort of experienced it firsthand living with him, was that escalation. So there were weekends where he would not sleep from, say, Friday nights till Monday. Like he would just ride through the weekend with no sleep whatsoever. But then there would be the point where, it's cocaine just sort of, you go high and high and high, and then you kind of can't really sleep or rest. So then he would sedate himself with all kind of things that he would take. He used other drugs to sedate, and there was sort of coexistence of multiple drugs, the ones that bring you up, the ones that put you down, and it was something to sedate him and something to bring him up. I wonder, is that an experience that you've had as well?
Yeah, and I'm curious why you're asking it, but I'll answer the question first, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a meeting with a nutritionist about 5 or 6 months ago that I've started working with, and she was asking me, have you had to take any medication, in the last sort of 15 years, antibiotics, any prescribed paracetamol? Because for her, it was a concern that perhaps I had routine pharmaceuticals that maybe needed to be cleared through my system.
Right.
And I was like, that's not the problem. I would be, on a night, if I'd done a load of cocaine, then I may end up taking 110 milligrams of Valium in a night, which is enough to bring down a horse, on top of maybe a bottle of whiskey, on top of whatever else, to be honest, I could find. Anything that I felt would get me to where I felt I wanted to feel. Like maybe it was just going to sleep. So yeah, it was crazy what I did. It's amazing that I am alive, to be honest with you. This is the thing. I suppose your first question around, graduating through, substances. Yeah, when I was 18, cocaine did seem fun. I thought it was fun, right? And probably till I knew I had a problem probably within about 3 or 4 years, because I knew I wanted to stop and I couldn't. But it wasn't bad yet. It was just uncomfortable. I went to my first 12-step meeting in, I think it was at least 9 years before I got clean. So that meant for 9 years I knew I had a significant problem that I was living with. And from that point, it descended pretty drastically. But no matter what happened, it wasn't bad enough for me to stop, to actually radically stop. But why do you ask the question about the cocktail of substances?
Oh, because I've been the one that ended up being a bit of a enabler at points. And this are, dark nights of my life. But I remember instances where he had taken so much ketamine that he was, in the movie Wolf of Wall Street, when they say, oh, he's in the drooling phase. Yeah. That movie to me is hilarious, but also really reminds me of like sort of moments in my life, because that moment when they're on the floor and they're, sort of strangling with the phone, like I was the wife when she's screaming and sort of trying to do something. I was there, and there was my stepson in the next room, and I was an attorney at the time. So that was also very scary for me as an experience. And, at first it was a no, and then it was a slide, and sort of drugs gradually found our way to the apartment, which at first was such a boundary, but I didn't keep that boundary strong enough. And then not only it was there, but then I was, faced with it and seeing it. And being the one who had to learn more about drugs than I ever imagined I would. And that was scary. Like I remember the experience of thinking he died multiple times because I didn't know how drugs can work, and having to learn about drugs interaction and the different things that he was using. And that's not something that happened overnight. You know, when we met, it was not like that. That's like years and years in, when the usage had gone from, in his case, recreational to deep down addiction.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
It's interesting to use that word enablement, and what you went through was really tough. There's no easy solution there. But I meet with and know so many people who are in a relationship with someone who's in addiction, and they don't know what to do. And the truth is, there is only one thing one can do, and it's leave.
Well, that's...
anything else is enablement,
That's right.
Anything else, because an addict won't stop unless they're ready to stop. But as long as people around them are still enabling their behavior by even just being there, just by allowing them in the house, it tells them that they still haven't hit bottom yet, basically. So the thing I have to tell people, mothers, wives, husbands, brothers, sisters, when they have someone in their family in addiction, is you have to just shut the door. You have to shut the door, lock it, block the phone, and when they're ready to want real help, they will ask for it.
And I love that you said that, but being in those shoes, I also remember how tough that is.
It's very hard.
Especially when there is love involved, and albeit toxic love, right? Like with hindsight, I can see that, but it's still love or caring, right?
But is it love and caring? Is it love and caring? Because if the solution to helping them be free from addiction is to lock the door, is to walk away, if that's the most loving thing that one can do, then is the alternative loving at all? Or is it attachment? Is it codependency? Like, why would someone stay with an addict in active addiction? And this might be really heavy for people to hear, but maybe it is what someone needs to hear. I don't know. If someone's in active addiction, if you stay with them, you're enabling their addiction. If you leave, you are helping them reach a point where they may actually ask for help to stop. So the only loving action is to leave. If one can't leave and actually will stay not only in the suffering for themselves, but also enabling the suffering of the addict, that raises more questions, right?
That's right.
Are we dealing with attachment style now? Are we dealing with codependency? Are we dealing with insecurity? And I've seen very insidious scenarios where very insecure people actually, there is a functionality of being in a relationship with a using addict because it offers them a semblance of control. So I guess what I'm trying to do is highlight the point here is, if you can't walk away, because that is the only loving thing to do when dealing with an addict, if you can't walk away, then perhaps there's an opportunity to look inwards at the growth that one might have to do.
I fully agree. And with the hindsight of looking at the relationship and sort of applying a psychological and analytic frame to my past behavior, I can see that my own addiction bred the addiction to the relationship, which was codependence and attachment. And to me, there was one emotion that really governed that relationship, which was, well, perhaps two, one guilt and the other fear. The first guilt was I always felt responsible for my own addiction. So I wasn't addicted to a substance, unless you want to classify work as a substance, but I was a serious workaholic. And I know this may sound quite lighthearted compared to, say, cocaine or alcohol, but my work addiction was pretty severe. And one of the sort of fighting point was always the bickering between, well, what would you know about my life when you're always gone working. So yes, I may be doing cocaine until 3 a.m.
And that's what your partner said.
Yes,
Your
for years,
husband,
right?
yeah.
Like, would I be, tempted to go out and do that much coke if you were at home when you're doing an all-nighter? And of course, this is not a healthy relationship. We all agree. And it took me a few years to see that. But it's interesting that, my form of escapism was work.
Mm-hmm.
I would just gravitate towards work and not confront the addictions, his or mine, head on, because I just feel that.
Why? What are you afraid of? You said fear.
Fear.
So what was fear? Fear of what?
Fear of realizing that the relationship was going to end, which inevitably it did. And it did when I realized that he wasn't going to change. I insisted on him going to rehab, and that's never something that he wanted to do. And I'm a firm believer that everyone can change, but only if they truly want to. I knew that I had to change my behavior vis-a-vis work, and I was filling a gap. So I was willing to take action. But if you're the only person who's willing to work on your addiction and your partner, your husband, your wife isn't, then that's going to create a gap. So I exited the relationship once I had the realization. And I'm willing to agree with the fact that I should have realized that a few years before, that it wasn't going to change, that the sort of codependence, co-creation of addiction was just, one addiction sort of escalated the other. It was almost sort of not a game, but it was you were gone all weekend, so here is how much drugs I did, and here is how many hours you worked, or you worked 111 hours. Well, here are how many bags of cocaine I finished during that time. It's so unhealthy. But there was this wife guilt and stepmom guilt, because I feel like I was failing as a wife. I wasn't home. I wasn't fulfilling my traditional wife role. And I was failing as a stepmom because I wasn't home for my stepson. So I was also failing in that role. And the only thing I felt like I was doing well at the time was being a lawyer. So naturally, I think that we tend to gravitate towards doing more of the one thing that we're good at.
Well, I think what I heard you touch on, which is the cornerstone of all addictions, is self-worth,
right,
and lovability. But worthiness, workaholism is it as overtly destructive as drug addiction? No. It's socially acceptable, and I would say it's really insidious. Drug addiction, you kind of know where you stand. It's like, this is bad, and this is going to get messy. With workaholism, it sort of sits there creeping under the surface for years and years and years, until one dies. But ultimately, the premise is still the same, which is, I'm using this thing to change how I feel. How is it that one feels when they fall into an addiction? Not enough, right? I do not feel enough, and therefore I need to change how I feel. And with work, it's like, work, a lot of people find their validation in work. If I make partner, if I make this much money, if I get this job title, right? If I can buy these things, if my boss acknowledges me like this, if maybe one day, I don't know, maybe I'm CEO of that company, then I will be good enough, right? And then everyone else will see that I'm good enough. And so this is now the most important thing in the world, because if I don't maintain this, and this is the thing about workaholism, if I don't maintain this path, this trajectory that I'm on, then it will be exposed to the world, the thing that I truly believe, which is that I'm not enough. And therefore it becomes life and death. And then we put it in front of our families, we put it in front of our children. It's exactly the same as drugs, right?
It is. And you get a kick and you get a thrill, and it leads you to behaviors that are very similar. So, the sort of lying, right, which is a sort of cornerstone of addiction. You will do about anything to have access to your substance. You do the same with workaholism in a different way, but you'd be protecting that drug above all else, pretending that you're going out with friends when you're going into the office. Like, it's a weird thing to say, but I used to sneak into the office at the weekend, like, you know,
I think that's an amazing parallel, and I've never heard it before.
Yeah,
but that's really interesting.
I would sneak in, and I was like, oh, and I remember, Quinn, and it's just a weird thing to say, but I would say, oh, I'm going out to meet a friend for coffee, and I was going into the office, and the kick that I would get, I think, is similar to having
exactly the same.
A lover, maybe, or an affair. Like,
It's exactly
I don't
the
know,
same.
but I can imagine it was like having an affair, because I would get into the office and I would have this adrenaline of the high, like, oof, I'm in, right? Like, that's it. And the sort of the buffet of work would open up, right? And I open up my computer and I get this excitement. It's like, oh, here we go, bring it on, right? And I remember on a Saturday morning feeling that feeling, right? And it's just, it's not healthy. Or just being on my phone and checking like a sneaky email with the client or work. I'm not talking about any kind of romantic relationship with a client, genuine work, being somebody's attorney and getting that sense of, you know, being so fast to replying at 1 a.m., being the first one to reply, and just feeling, ooh, and then just flicking my phone or hiding my phone, pretending that I was buying dresses.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is that you sound exactly like anyone who might be addicted to, I don't know, gambling or alcohol or sex addiction or anything else, or drugs. Like, it's exactly the same mindset, this projection to being able to indulge in this thing in which you find validation, in which you find mood and mind altering states. It's exactly the same.
You really do. Which is
but you said it, like, you use the word dishonesty, right? So what's so you say the lie is, well, I'm going to say I'm going to go here, but actually I'm going to work. But what's the real dishonesty? What's
the real dishonesty is the fact that you're doing that to alter your state because there is a void that you're fulfilling with something else, which is the work piece. The real dishonesty was obviously, you know, to whomever I was saying I was going to meet up a friend when I was sneaking into the office. But the truth is I was looking for a stealth alteration. I was looking for a thing that will give me anything.
And so
right?
What's the honesty behind that? What's that void?
That all my life, my self-worth had been built upon a professional status. That the biggest voice that I had in my head growing up was that of my father. If you're enjoying this show so far, I just have a very quick favor to ask you. Could you go ahead and click the follow button or the subscribe button? It would mean so much to me, and it would really help to grow our show so that we can enhance the production, we can bring you the best possible guests, and we can have the most amazing conversations. So if you haven't already done this, please take a moment today to go ahead and click the follow button or the subscribe button. Thank you so much. And now let's go back to this amazing conversation. And I equated how much he was loving me to how successful I would become. And the more success I would get, the more love I would get from my father. I'm not saying that's a fact. I'm saying that was my interpretation of having...
So what's behind that?
Well, a very misconstrued idea of conditional love. It took me years to realize that actually my father loves me wholeheartedly, not for how many promotions I got in my 20s and whether or not I was able to work at the, you know, world's best law firm. And I had to test that, though. What I mean by that is, you know, he's the reason I became a lawyer, but he's also, in a way, a reason I quit. And knowing and seeing that he still loved me, even when I was no longer a lawyer, actually was such a healing piece, along with a lot of therapy and a lot of work on that. But it's interesting how you just attach an identity to status. And I was very status driven. I'm not afraid to say that I had quite a materialistic mindset in my 20s and early 30s of, you know, getting the promotion, getting the bonus, getting the status. I remember, you know, it's going to sound very American Psycho, but that very first business card that I got, and I saw my name and I saw associate on it, and at the time, associate, then of course you aim for more. But at the time, associate was so big to me, attached to my name. And I just remember just looking at this card and such an American Psycho moment, right? Like feeling so much joy.
It's the literal creation of a false idol.
Right.
It's like I'm giving this little inanimate piece of paper my worth. It now resides in this thing outside of me. But as soon as it's outside of you, your worth becomes incredibly fragile in that way. It's interesting though, the father-daughter thing. I have 3 children, one of whom is a teenage daughter, and learning how to parent. My parents didn't parent particularly well. They did the best they could, but it was that's just the way that generations work. So I try to be the best parent I can be, and what I've learned about teenage daughters in particular is sort of what you just said that you came to learn, which is that your father loves you whatever, right? It's like whatever happens, like whatever job, whatever, I'm proud just because, right? And it might sound obvious, but this is the thing. I heard this from a couple of spiritual and religious leaders, some Kabbalistic rabbis who were talking about this stuff. And it was like, we have to tell our children that we're proud just because, every night, even with my sons, I say to them before bed, I say, listen, no matter what you achieve on the football pitch, no matter what you do at school or how good your academics are or how handsome I might tell you I think you are, I'm proud of you just because. None of that influences my pride. I'm proud of you just because. And with my daughter, I've learnt that when she gets angry and emotional, which she can really do, and she's a lot like me, my daughter, and she's wonderful and wonderful and beautiful and intelligent and terrifying when she wants to be. But really what she's doing is she's pushing away as hard as she can to see if I'm still there afterwards. And what I've learned is to not react and to say, hey, that's not okay, the way you're talking right now, but I still love you and I'm not going anywhere. And what I found is she then comes back to me once the system has settled. And what's happening, which is what I think you just sort of described, which is it sort of registers that she's safe and loved just because, not because of anything in particular, good or bad, And I guess trying to instill that level of self-worth in my children is so important to me because it's what I didn't have growing up. So when my mother left and I felt this abandonment wound occur, I wasn't aware of it, of course, at 13, but that's what happened. My mum and my sisters were taken. That feminine was ripped away from me. I immediately internalized this as that I'm not enough. My mother doesn't want me. Then I can't possibly be enough. I must be unlovable. And so I dealt with that in 2 ways. It wasn't just drugs. I also dealt with it through high achieving. I dealt with it through, I launched my first advertising consultancy when I was 18. I was working with Vodafone, Barclays, McDonald's when I was 19. I achieved a lot in order to feel that I was good enough. Right? The drugs was the other thing I did. Right? It was this very unsustainable solution to feeling like shit, to feeling worthless. And I did both. I doubled down, high achieving, loads of drugs. And the thing is that it burnt me out just incredibly quickly. It was incredibly unsustainable, but it was ultimately, of course, a gift.
Was there a form of escapism in all of that? I wonder, were you chasing something to get more of, or were you running away from?
It's a great question because it was all of it, right? I always talk about my life in active addiction as sort of trying to sustain some level of control. That what I would do is it felt like I was holding a steering wheel, right? And I had to grip it like this, because if it veered even slightly to the left or right, then I would fall off a cliff. So it's like I was driving with a cliff on either side. And I had to have my foot right on the accelerator because something terrible was chasing me. And if that thing caught up with me, then something terrible would happen. So I had to keep going really, really fast to get over there where it was going to be safe, right? This is how I existed. So gripping a steering wheel, foot on the accelerator, terrified panic, right? This is how I lived my life, right? This is what was going on. I wasn't aware that this is how I felt. So the escapism, I was constantly trying to escape. If I could make enough money, that would make me maybe feel safe for 5 minutes. If I could buy a nice car and show people that I'm worthy, then that might help me for 5 minutes. If I had enough money, then the right woman will like me. Truth is, the women that would like me for money are definitely not the right women for me anyway, and I ended up in very toxic relationships because of it. So it was the escapism was I was escaping this terrible fear that I was completely unaware of. Right? Most people are completely unaware of it. I would do anything, and so my life was constantly projecting to the next thing. I had to close the next deal, win the next thing, buy the next thing, go out with the next woman, do whatever it was to change how I feel. The thing is it's honesty. I didn't know I felt like that. And this is the thing I think people are waking up to today, whether they're high achievers or sports or athletes or anyone really. Actors, look at all the people who are sober now in the world. I mean, just Google it. Like, incredible people. Anyone from Robert Downey Jr. to Ringo Starr, Anthony Hopkins to, I think, Blake Lively is now. It's like Miley Cyrus, 5 years. It's like everyone, not everyone. Joe Rogan. The trend is now is that actually being able to sit with our feelings is important. Why? Because of honesty. I didn't know I was feeling that fear, and so I lived my life making decisions from fear, which meant I was making dysfunctional decisions, dysfunctional relationships, dysfunctional decisions around money, dysfunctional parenting styles, dysfunctional everything. And I wasn't in control. That meant my life that I had created was just built on fear, right? And that's not, life's too good to waste in fear. But if I can be honest with myself, which I can only do if I'm sober, right? Because if I'm drunk or high or indulged in work or sex addiction or whatever else, then I'm not in the present moment. I am just in some pleasure thing that is just, I may as well be off in the clouds, right? But if I'm sober, I can go, okay, how am I feeling? Even if it's horrible. And I can sit with those feelings and I can go, I'm scared. Well, what am I afraid of? Maybe I'm afraid of that. Oh, it's that old story. I'm not enough. Okay, well, what part of me is triggered by that? Oh, maybe it's my sister who made a comment about something and then that hurt my feelings. It reminded me when I was a child and how I was never enough. But then I get to say, no, we've been here before. You are enough. Let's give some love and some kindness to myself. Let's pick up that 8-year-old version of myself and give him a hug and let him know that he's okay. And then I get to feel some real peace. And then I get to interact with the world from a place of love and kindness and authenticity. But it's the honesty, the self-honesty. Forget being honest with other people. That comes afterwards. First of all, I have to be honest with myself.
Did you put yourself in rehab, or did you have a kind of ultimatum from an ex-wife or a community member or family member? Did you voluntarily go to rehab and put your hand up and said, I need help? I'm just curious. How did that happen for you?
So I walked myself into rehab. I was actually 3 days clean. I walked myself and I was done. When I finished, when I reached that point where I realized I'd rather be dead than carry on finding myself in this pattern of using drugs and alcohol the way I did, I was done. I was willing to, if I had to lose my job, I had to lose my job. If my wife and kids were going to leave me, that had to happen, because I was going to die if I didn't stop. So I put it all on the line, and I said, I'm going to rehab, and I walked myself into rehab. The thing is, for anyone listening who may be struggling with addiction, or who has someone in their life who might be struggling with addiction, is, in my experience, people won't stop until they want to stop, right? You can have an intervention, you can beg and plead, you can send them to rehab. It won't probably work. In fact, the stats of the success rate of people just doing rehab are very, very, very small. Everyone leaving rehab will generally say that their life has changed and they're done. But without an active program of recovery, they don't tend to stay clean. Recovery is a daily practice. Recovery is behavioral transformation. Rehab is an event. Rehab is a retreat, a yoga retreat. You could go on a yoga retreat and find bliss for 3 days. But if the second that you come back, you're back into the whirlwind of life and work and kids and family, that bliss is not going to be sustained unless you carve out time every day to restore yourself to that yoga bliss. Right? It's the same with recovery. So it's people think, well, maybe if I can just get this person to rehab, again, until someone says they want to be done, in my experience, it's never usually quite enough.
I love that you mentioned that, and I was smiling because I haven't been to quote unquote rehab per se, but my ashram, where I put myself in, locked myself in quite literally for 3 months with my Indian gurus in a Hare Krishna ashram on my own in India, was the closest I could think of to rehab, right? So at the time, I knew that something had to change in my behavioral pattern, and I knew I had to have physical distancing from my substance of choice, which was work. So I needed to be somewhere with no temptation. Like, you would need to get rid of the bottles of wine. Yeah. I needed to get rid of emails. I needed to get rid of computers and laptops for a period of time for the rehab. And that's what I did. I voluntarily put myself there, which was, such a foreign sort of context where there was no status, no business card, that stuff, and no speech, which I know that's a weird thing to say, but that particular ashram did a lot of silent practices, and we were learning meditative practice, which involved a lot of literal sitting in silence. And being an attorney, I was always paid based on, how eloquent I could be, or at least my words, written form or delivery, right? So when you're paid as a lawyer and then you submit to being in stillness and silence, that was so triggering, but it was also so insightful because I was confronted with not being able to hide behind ego or status or laminated business cards. Right.
So what's really interesting for me about what you're saying is that, and the comparison, to rehab is the pattern interrupt, right? Where rehab's amazing is it's a pattern interrupt. It's like, okay, it's a big acknowledgement that something has to change, and I am taking drastic action to do that. And so, for you to have those 3 months to just disconnect, to put your hands up and say, I need to change, something has to change, and then to put yourself in this extreme scenario is exactly the same. And for me, it was amazing. Right, rehab was the kindest, most amazing thing I ever did for myself. It was, I got to I didn't want to leave. They had to make me even go out just to go for a walk and go. I felt so safe for the first time in my life. And they had sound bowl therapy and they had yoga, and it was just this amazing. It was probably a bit like your retreat, to be honest. It gave me this moment to acknowledge how much had to change.
How long was your rehab?
4 weeks is what I did.
4 weeks. And did you ever struggled during that 4 weeks with withdrawal?
No. I mean, cocaine isn't really it's not a conventional withdrawal drug, in the sense of like where opiate addiction or alcoholism, or even benzodiazepine and Valium and things like that. It's more of a psychological withdrawal. It's more of a withdrawal around having to feel your feelings and not being able to change them. We call it actually in recovery thawing out. It's where we've kept our feelings frozen for so long that when we stop taking drugs, it's almost like the ice melts and they start coming up, and it can be really, really intense. And certainly for cocaine addiction, having to not be able to change how you feel, or at least suppress feelings, that's the thing. But that's why, we often in recovery very quickly move to food. Food addiction. I was eating a banana bread for breakfast like every day for about a month afterwards, after I left rehab. I remember eating a Battenberg cake at 7 a.m, like a big one, just like out of the fridge, because the addiction just moves. And then after I realized how dysfunctional that was, it then became about exercise, funnily enough. And I suddenly was running 15 kilometers a day every day, and I'd never run in my life. And then it became romantic pursuits, so the addiction, this is the thing about drug addiction. The good news is it's never about the drugs, right? Drugs are just a tool to cope with how we feel, right? Once we stop taking drugs in addiction, we realize why we used the drugs in the first place, and then we can do something about it.
So how did you move from removing the cocaine to, inserting the banana bread for breakfast and the romantic pursuit, and then perhaps paraphrasing, but maybe the sex addiction or the pursuit of sexual encounters? So it sounds to me like at least during a period of time, you replaced one addiction with potentially some other forms.
We all do, and I think, and I'll answer that question. But if you think about, when you went to your ashram for 3 months, right, and to break workaholism, you would have realized what was driving you to behave like that, right? You would have been like, oh, this is the narrative in my head. These are the feelings. And that's why I'm assuming you didn't go back to law when you left the ashram, right?
Well, my intention was to go back to the industry, but without being an active attorney. So I wanted to be of service of other attorneys. So my intention was to serve the industry, but in a different capacity.
Okay, so change the playing field, though.
That's right. So after the ashram, I started to study to become a clinical hypnotherapist and a coach, and actually created and founded the business that I run now, based on the foundation of recovery being the foundation upon which sustainable success can be built.
Yeah, so obviously a complete massive evolution from what I can only describe as, like a character from Suits. Right? Like suddenly now you're like helping and purpose driven and all the rest of it. And before it was just more. And, and that was the thing. I guess the thing about drug addiction is that it is so extreme that everything else seems completely fine in comparison. Eating banana bread for breakfast every day compared to doing cocaine every day is completely fine in our heads. Like today, how healthy and sort of health conscious I am. I mean, I almost never eat banana bread at all, but it's like, and so the idea of having it for breakfast every day is crazy. But at the time, I was like, well, this is fine. And actually, we say this in recovery. We say, like, do whatever you need to do. Just don't pick up drugs. So yeah, it went to food. And this was my naivety, because here's the thing about recovery. When we start taking drugs, we usually stunt ourselves emotionally at that age. So if I started taking drugs at 13, my emotional development kind of froze at that point until I stopped. And this is the same for I would say most drug addicts, but this is my subjective opinion. although there's many people in recovery who share this opinion, which means that when you stop taking drugs, so when I stopped taking drugs, I was 34, which meant I was a 34-year-old with the emotional development of a 13-year-old. And so obviously eating cake for breakfast every day seemed like an acceptable thing. But then you go look at romantic relationships and how one behaves, and people are always talking about, Sabrina Carpenter wrote a song called Man Child. It's like, this is the thing, is that you might have a man's body, but actually underneath it's just a scared little boy. And it was the work that I did after rehab, the therapeutic work, it was the self-analysis, the spiritual growth that allowed me to connect with my inner child, that allowed me to then grow up, to then behave like a man, to father like a man, to be a romantic partner like a man, not a scared boy in a man's body. And so all of those dysfunctions that you touched on, whether it be food or sex or money or materialism, whatever it is, I had to grow up. I didn't know, there was this naivety about me, and that a lot of addicts have when they come into recovery, and they have to learn how to live, right? Because we didn't know. The thing about getting a drug addiction is that we're just doing the best we can. We feel like shit, and so we try to change how we feel with the best we have at our. We're not bad people. No addict is a bad person. They're scared and they're hurt and they're afraid and they're trying to cope to the best of their ability. And they may do bad things because of that, but they're not a bad person. They're just trying to survive, trying to function. And so these terrible decisions that get made, these are the consequences of effectively hurt inner children in adult bodies.
I wonder, how do you then live with a recovered addictive personality? And I'm really curious because one keeps traits, right? I understand you've recovered, you've gone successfully to rehab, you're sober for many years now. But I wonder, do you have to sometimes set boundaries or sort of buffers or system in place to avoid temptation or to check in with yourself? Or do you have any kind of routines so that you know that you're not sort of dancing on the fine line of going back to your old ways?
I have a very intricate and secure scaffolding around me at all times. And, what that looks like is I have people who I hold myself accountable to in recovery, and there are people who hold themselves accountable to me. It's the sponsor-sponsee dynamic of 12-step recovery. I have a program that I follow. I go to 12-step meetings. These are all things that I do. The truth is, the desire to use, the compulsion, the impulse to want to use, I haven't felt that for years and years. I'm never tempted to use because I work a very strong program.
Okay.
And this is in very early recovery. There may have, like in the first year perhaps, there may have been temptation. But I was so kind to myself in my first year. I said, right, I'm not going in a pub or a bar for a year. I'm not going to watch my favourite football team for a year. I'm not going to be around people drinking, and definitely not going to be around people doing drugs for a year. So I really protected myself. I didn't even walk into a pub when I needed to use the loo. I was like, I'm just not being in this space. And it was a really, and my friends who wanted to see me, we would go for a walk or we'd play squash, or, the friends who wanted to see me, made the effort to see me, or would go for lunch or breakfast or something. So in the early recovery, I was really protective. Later on, I have just built a system, a scaffolding around myself. I meditate every morning so I can check in with how I'm feeling. If I'm feeling bad, then I take precautions. I call my sponsor, I sit down with my fiance, I talk, I share my feelings, I do the right things to look after myself. The biggest thing about recovery was learning how to parent myself, learning how to give myself the worthiness that I wanted from my father, or the love that I wanted from my mother. In being able to give myself that, not only did I break addiction, but I also broke insecurity. low self-worth, low self-esteem, and then all of that impacted other aspects of my life. So I suddenly had secure romantic relationships. I had purposeful work. I had, my worth and value was in doing esteemable things, not what I could get or how cool my name looked on a business card.
I know that feeling. It's interesting that you mentioned meditation, because that was such a pivotal tool for me. And, I was so cynical when I thought about meditation before. I thought it was woo-woo. I thought it was, wishy-washy and all of the above. But, it's evidence-based. It's backed by science. But it's truly transformative. And it's something that I use daily in small doses. Like I microdose on meditation. I don't have a hugely spiritual practice. My meditation can look like having my headphones and being on a train, on a plane, on a bus, and doing guided meditation or self-hypnosis. So it's not necessarily, being in an ashram, right? I make my meditation very corporate friendly, so to speak, and very nomadic as well, to match my lifestyle. But I do it because I know it's one thing that soothes my anxious brain and my burnout prone brain and my recovered workaholic brain as well. I wonder, what else do you do day to day other than meditation to sort of keep you in check and aligned with those newfound values?
So spirituality, which is something you sort of touched on there, which definitely I would say meditation sits in, has now, as you say, been proven by science, right? So the effects of meditation, there is countless studies by major universities and areas of study to show the scientific and benefits of meditation and the therapeutic and medicinal benefits of these things. So spirituality, which used to be this sort of new age weird thing, has now more and more of it's been proven by science, whether it be neuroscience or quantum physics or whatever else. I meditate. Yes, I meditate all of the time. Meditation is an ancient human practice that has been practiced by every major religion since the dawn of time, every major culture. There is a reason for it. I think the bigger question is when did we stop, right? And why did we stop? And this has been the enlightening thing for me, because today I see myself as very spiritual. I see myself as being in tune to that side of myself and that side of our species. Prior to recovery, no, right? I was more Wolf of Wall Street than spiritual. But today I do all of the things. Now, I believe this goes back to the Industrial Revolution, right? In the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, we killed the concept of God. Nietzsche famously said it in the late 1800s, God is dead. We are the ones who killed him. And what we did in getting rid of this concept of a higher power is we replaced God with our own egos. As soon as we did that, we changed the flow of things so drastically that rather than being of service to others, even if it was just because we believed that if we did good things we'd go to heaven and we did bad things we'd go to hell, even if that was the only reason we did good things, we still did good things. But as soon as we remove the concept of others and unity and replace it with self, we become self-seeking. And that means greed and selfishness, and it means self-centered fear. They have more than me. They're better than me. They're going to do better than me. They're safer than me. They're more loved than me, right? And this goes round and round and round. And over the last 150 years, it has intensified and got louder and louder. And now, with social media and everything else, it's intensifying. And we have gone as a species who were connected, who were of service, who did the best to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to being very isolated, very alone, right? Ultimately our main sense of relief is staring into a black rectangle. Even on the train coming here today, just watching people on the platform, it's just staring into the phone. And I get it, I do it, right? But this is where what we've become. If we don't start connecting with something bigger than ourselves, even if all that is just the universe, right? It doesn't need to be religious. It doesn't need to even be spiritual.
Could be nature.
It could be nature as an ecosystem, right? Unless we start physically connecting with that, experiencing it, right? The self-centered fear, which breeds all addiction, because all addiction stems from self-centered fear. I'm not enough. I need to do something to change that, right? The answer ultimately is spirituality. Right, in some way, shape or form. And if that is just meditating, and there is lots of atheist-based meditation apps, right? If that's meditating, then great. Just feeling a part of something. It's the most important thing. And this is why I don't suffer from addiction today, because I realized that hole that was within me was this self-centeredness. And that actually, as soon as I started being of service to other people, and you would have experienced this after you left your ashram and after you started pursuing the various different service-led roles that you did, that hole, that need for the next business card, the next job title, the next salary, it's not there anymore. Like my need to take drugs, my life is full. I get to be of service to the best of my ability to my children. I get to be of service to my fiance, my friends, to people I don't even know. Maybe there's one person out there listening to this who goes, okay, I'm going to try and change how I live. I'm going to go and get help. I'm going to put my hand up.
Yes.
That is worth getting out of bed for.
It is. And you can continue to be a high achiever without the addiction, right? I
Sure. Better.
Did not stop being ambitious. And it's not, because I think that's also an important message, right? It's not an either or equation. It's not your high achiever, ambitious and high status and addicted, or you just quit it all and go, live in an ashram and become a monk, right? If that's your jam, right? But that's not going to be resonating with our listener today. What I'm saying is not quit your job, go to an ashram necessarily, is find your inner ashram, whatever that might be. That might be meditation, that might be nature, that might be movement, and continue to be the high achiever that you always wanted to be.
Be more of a high achiever.
Exactly.
You can achieve even more, climb even higher. If that's what you want, just do it because it's what you want, not because you're scared that if you don't do it, you'll not be enough. That's just the paradox shift.
It is. I can only attest to that. It's interesting that when I started to have recovery as the foundation upon which I built the newfound success, I actually became more successful than I could ever imagine I would be. And it really dawned on me that that's the definition of sustainable success, as opposed to the kind of success that I used to chase by trying to model my father, which was actually the kind of success that leads you to burnout and a heart attack, and therefore the kind of success that is not sustainable because you can't survive it, right?
I love sustainable success. It's an amazingly noble thing. And this is where we need to get to, because the old energy sources of more, of selfishness and all of that pursuit, they're burning out. They're not working anymore.
Quinn, I've learned so much. I have one last question for you. Where can our listener connect to your newly created world if they heard you today and they've had powerful insights and your story resonated? How would you like them to connect with you?
I operate most on LinkedIn. So Quinn Stanfield Bruce. I think I'm the only one in the world. And on there's access to, I have a podcast called Learning How to Live, which touches on, like I said earlier, learning how to live after not knowing, learning how to have romantic relationships, learning how work works, learning how to parent, learning how to, how to be a good romantic partner. So there's the podcast, but yeah, LinkedIn is my main port of call. I'm also on Instagram. Quinn is human. But yeah, any one of them. And if anyone has any questions around addiction or recovery, please do reach out, and I'll happily either answer them if I can or point people in the right direction.
Quinn, thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to be featured on industry's leading podcasts, you know you need to grow your LinkedIn presence and improve your personal brand, but have zero time to do it yourself. Capture B is your answer. I've been using it myself, and it's been just a game changer. So today, I want to share it with you. If you're ready to grow your business and personal brand without burning out in the process, go to captureb.io. Thank you for spending your time with me today and listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe so that you can receive weekly updates. And if today's message resonated with you, please remember to share it with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who could really benefit from this episode.